Thanks very much, Noel. My
Alrighty.
name is Greg. Oh, are we ready?
Good. Yes, we are. Thank you.
Okay. I'm Greg Newman, product manager at TrustSphere. As you probably guessed by my accent, I am not from Phoenix, Arizona, but I do live in sunny Phoenix, Arizona. I'm from New Zealand, but I've been moving around the world for about 20 years building HR systems. So I spent my first 15 years building SAP HR systems, and at the end of my time in the SAP world, I sort of thought that how I wanted to measure success was at the end of a project, how many hugs did I get from the HR team? And it turned out that no matter how hard you work on an SAP HR project, you pretty much get 0 hugs from anyone. So if anyone is suffering under a cumbersome SAP system that I contributed to, I start with a quick apology. My interest is really in what is HR doing and what data does HR have access to, and how can we change the sources of data we're consuming or add to the sources of data we're consuming to get fresh insights on the way work really gets done. And so I've been with TrustSphere about 3.5 years. TrustSphere has been around for about 7 years, and we are an organizational network analytics company. We measure human networks within organizations. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about why we think this is important. We'll talk about how some of our customers are using it to strengthen HR processes. And then if time allows, I'll give you a quick demonstration and show you what it looks like in practice. And exactly as Noel said, I'm super happy to take questions. So every time I take a breath, that's your chance to jump in. Let's keep this as interactive as we can. So what we're doing at TrustSphere is we are trying to measure the social capital of employees. And the best way to describe that, I think, is to think of human capital as traditional HR data. Where I went to university, how long I've been in the industry, what are my skills, what are my qualifications. That's a fairly static set of data. I finished up at a big oil and gas company where we discovered the average employee only had 3 master data changes a year. So you can imagine if you're running an attrition model on human capital data, you're not really going to get much variation from year to year. What we're interested in the TrustSphere world is the other side of that, the complement to that is how do I build relationships? How do I exert influence? Who do I work with? Who do I not work with? How collaborative am I? And that's we think for a lot of people, the real key is to have both that human capital view of skills and experience and the social ability to build relationships and get work done through teams and through using the organization's network. So a little bit of background on networks. When we go to work, we build 6 different networks at least. So starting at the top of the circle, the people we work with, the wider social network, which is what most people think of, our innovation network, people we throw crazy ideas at, a mentor network, usually the smallest, those people who we can go to for wisdom and advice. Expertise networks, it doesn't always have to be technology. Those expertise networks could be how to navigate the organization, how to navigate internal politics, those people who know how to get stuff done. And then finally, the daily network, those people we engage with and we chat with every day. And what we do at TrustSphere, by looking at corporate communication systems like email, instant message, and telephone data, we're able to measure the growth and the change and the activity around work, innovation, and expertise. Because not surprisingly, they're the networks that leave the strongest digital trace in our corporate communication systems. So probably a good point there to explain we don't touch private email, we don't touch Gmail, we don't look at LinkedIn or Facebook. We are scraping corporate communications data from corporate email, corporate instant messaging, and corporate telephone records. Once we've mapped out all of these relationships and all of these networks, our trust score algorithm then runs over that to start to establish the differences in strength of the relationships, so that we can then see where pockets of relationships are strong, where relationships might be weak or absent. And we do that by looking at how people are interacting, how fast do they interact, what's their response rate, How equal are their communications? You know, what type of priority are we making other people when we work with them during the day? So we've got this pretty much real-time ongoing measurement of networks within an organization. And this is what it looks like. This is TrustSphere collaborating with IBM. This is us going to IBM, building a set of partnerships, doing some product development together, taking some products out to market and acquiring some customers. And what that shows is, what it showed us as a small 40-person company is that to get into bed with a big technology company, in our case, took 13 of our people building nearly 300 unique relationships with people at IBM. And this is the growth of that set of networks and relationships over 3 years. And I think it's important to say that we don't touch content, so we don't read people's email, we don't get access to attachments, we don't perform any sort of semantic evaluation. We're really interested in measuring relationships, and the logs, the transaction log files that things like Office 365, Exchange, Slack, and Yammer create give us the raw data that we then use to create the networks. Any questions or thoughts so far?
That sounds good so far. Go for it.
So why is this important? Why is social capital important? Just three quick examples why measuring social capital and having access to social capital data is a big business benefit. One of my favorite stories is around the difference between innovation and expertise. And the larger an organization gets, the research shows the more separate their networks of innovation and expertise become. Because in a large organization, people who have accrued a lot of expertise actually have the most to lose if the organization rapidly transforms and rapidly changes. And I always use that example of that jump between, on-premise computing to cloud computing being a really good example of that. And even in my own career in the SAP world, when SAP started moving to success factors, that devalued the skills and experience I had in R3 on-premise. And so I think that's why a lot of organizations are putting their innovation networks outside their corporate offices, because they know that if they leave them with access to their regular employees and their regular experts, they'll probably get worn down and burnt out pretty quickly. Another really interesting application of it is understanding salespeople's networks. So a company we're good friends with did some analysis on salespeople's networks, and they were able to show that the most important predictor of a salesperson's success wasn't actually their external relationships, but it was actually their internal relationships. Having someone in marketing and product and finance and customer service that they could use when the pressure was on, when that deal was trying to close, to help them navigate problems, navigate pricing problems, product problems, and get the deal closed. So there's some examples of why social capital is important and should start to become more visible.
Greg, this is Noah. Could I ask a very quick question? So,
sure.
If you are looking within the organization as you've done, and you can look at pockets of the like you say, social network of, let's say, salespeople, do any of your customers go a step further to look at their distribution and vendor network? I'm just kind of curious about. Or are you able to do so, but nobody's really gone to that next step?
Yeah, no. We have a company in Hong Kong. It's a great example of that. So they have a whole lot of brands. They manufacture clothing for a whole lot of retailers all around the world, and they've done exactly that because they've grown by acquisition. So we've used data that we've been able to extract to understand where they have relationships with different suppliers, different people who are giving them products and services and technology, and they've been able to use that as a starting point, almost like an SRM rather than a CRM, a supplier relationship management view, so that they could start to harmonize all of those buying processes.
Great, thank you.
And CRM is a big thing for us at the other end, customer relationship management. we do instant data transfers. So we help organizations to move all of their digital communications into their CRM so that people can instantly see every interaction that's happening with a prospect or an account. So what we're seeing is three different views of an organization: me as an individual, us as a group of human beings collaborating internally, and then, as we sort of touched on, suppliers, customers, industry, competitors, government, all of those relationships. And our business actually started off in this space looking at the negative side of that. So insider trading and fraud and collusion, the inappropriate relationships that develop in organizations. We pick them up because they're quite obviously anomalous to all of the other relationships that people have. I think the golden rule I learned early on was that you don't commit fraud with people. You only commit fraud with people you trust. So we see those trust relationships building up. So how are our customers using it? I'm going to give you 5 examples of how our customers are using this data to strengthen different HR processes. The first one is around identifying talent or stars or high potential employees. So what we know, having looked at several organizations in this space, is that people who make good high potential employees build very different networks to regular employees. So this is data from a bank in Singapore, but operating in about 15 different countries in Asia. And what we could see is that their Hypose built almost double the network and relationships in their first 3 years to an average employee. So those Hypos have more connections in different departments, in different teams. They're more influential. They know more people up and down the hierarchy. They really are working different to an average employee. So we're helping customers to take a really data-driven approach to starting to build high potential pools or to refine the quality of their pools based on some really nice, hard quantitative data. Another example, we're working with one of the largest fast-moving consumer goods companies to measure the impact of their leadership development program. So it's traditionally been hard to say how has someone's behaviour changed. Surveys give us a fairly biased and point-in-time view. What we do with this customer is every 2 months over the duration of the program, we produce these network summaries, and they start to show what's happening to the leader's network, what's happening to their relationships. But as well as showing the leader view, we also are able to measure what's happening to their team's behaviour. So is the team reducing silos internally? Are they becoming more collaborative? Is their manager speaking to them more often? Are they introducing their social capital into their team so their team can leverage it? So we're able to gather this data without any sort of human interaction and present to the managers and the leaders, this is how you network, this is where your network is strong, this is where it's weak, and they build that into coaching moments over the duration of the course.
Greg, this is Nov again. My apologies for asking another question. Do you have the ability to overlay where a network started vis-a-vis where it is, let's say, 6 months later? To your point about, let's say, leadership training, kind of a comparative of a delta between where they were and where they are.
Yeah, so that's exactly what we do in this with this customer. Is we baseline it we take the network activity of the 2 months prior to the course starting, and we create a baseline on that. And then every 2 months through the program, we show the deltas and where that change is. So we're able to see how much network activity is changing, how relationships are strengthening, where they're dropping off, because we've got a continuous signal.
So I'm going to extend myself one more time and say,
sure.
Have you had any customers looking at, if you will, this is a potential metric for the effectiveness of training or learning?
Yeah, and that's exactly where I think we offer a really valuable view, because if you look at what makes training effective is where that behaviour is, where someone's been taught something, and that behaviour change doesn't just happen instantly, but continues to be sustained. And that's where I think we have this in the leadership space, especially when we ran our first prototype with this fast-moving consumer goods company. At the end of the 6 months, the managers actually went back to the consulting company we'd partnered with and said, can we get access to these for another 12 months? because for a manager, this was clearly invaluable to them understanding what behaviors they were exhibiting and were they sustaining that change in internal communication, outside working hours, email, cross-country collaboration, all of that data we're picking up and continually measuring.
This is Mike. Pardon me. With regard to Hypose, all big companies are tracking their high potentials, and they identify them based on some criteria. Have you come across any organizations who have a group of people that they identify as Hypose, but your data suggests that based on their social networking activity, other people should be regarded as Hypose? Or have you found a correlation in your data based on people's social networking behaviors to existing hypo populations that companies already have? Or have you been able to, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so but the first two companies we did this with were very dramatically different. The first company, which is that one, the slide I showed, they had a really rigorous approach to identifying talent, and it took up to 3 years to get nominated for the Hypo program, and it was a whole series of expected behaviours and demonstrable outcomes that they looked for before someone got on the Hypo program. So when we looked at their Hypo program, we saw this big gap between the good Hypos and regular employees. The next company that we went to, which was a much more traditional international telco, they had virtually no rigor to their Hypo identification program. And the example that I loved was that they said, it just seems like everyone in Australia is a Hypo, because we asked the manager to nominate their employees who are Hypos, and it turned out their Australian managers just nominated everyone. And their Singaporean managers didn't nominate anyone. So they had a very unstructured approach to identifying Hypos, full of biases and holes. And when we looked at those Hypos' social capital versus the average employee in the organisation, it was very, very close. So with them in the March intake, we actually helped them to use social capital to identify hidden stars, as they called it, within their organisation. It wasn't just on social capital, it was also on other behaviours that they were starting to bring in as well. So what we'll do now is over the next year, we'll measure the behaviour of those Hypos, see if they continue to develop, and see if they're as more satisfied with the people in their Hypo program now. Does that make sense?
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, our interest in all these things is running these analysis as long as possible, right? Because we love to see that this stuff sustains, and we want to bring in what's the business impact that's created, because that's the real value. For example, with the leadership development stuff, what they're going to do, we did the prototype, now we're doing 300 managers around the world. They're going to start to gather data on what's happened to their research and development outcomes and see if there's a dramatic difference at the end of this. Not just on did the training work, but did this have a real business impact?
And on the flip side of the coin, have you come across any situations where you've worked with a company that has a rigorous Hypo definition, governance in place, where after you've analyzed the social networking behaviors, one would probably not rise to the level of being a Hypo based on those measures? And have you had, and what happens, or what has happened when you've uncovered those types of things?
No, so we haven't yet. We'll keep running this with customers, and we think our wins are as important. Our failures are as important as our wins in this regard. So we're pretty transparent about when things work and when they don't work. We have, for example, helped an organisation that didn't have a Hypo program, but they did have a whole lot of trainees. So for them, we were able to just go through and say, let's just look at it was an IT organisation in Asia. With no program at all, let's look at all your trainees that you've had for a year, and let's start to measure their social capital going forward. So we'll try anything once. there's no bad ideas, we figure.
Okay, thank you.
So another hot topic for us is around employee wellness, and we're working with one of the world's largest insurance companies to measure, and we were just talking about this before we started, to measure some passive indicators of employee wellness. And we know that these three things you're looking at here are very good predictors of employee burnout, but there's a whole lot of other stuff as well. But what we can reliably pick up based on digital communications in the workplace is people who are over-collaborated. So that's the concept that once you start being recognized as a center of expertise or a wealth of knowledge, then everyone reaches out to you and everyone drags you into their conversations. And those people, as Rob Cross describes, who are over-collaborated can be great performers, but then suddenly leave the organization. Because
that happens to Nove all the time, although not negatively. So that's good.
everyone has a level they can deal with, and I think it's really different for different people.
Nove has a high tolerance.
Yeah. But then sorry.
I was just going to ask. So the kinds of data you're capturing, and with the advent of a lot of I'll call them gadgets for wellness programs, are you absorbing that information as well? In terms of Nove seems to work out at this time, and he seems to be running with his friends. The idea of the metrics around wellness programs are really kind of self-serving. Kind of like in my mind, the recognition programs are self-serving as well. So I'm just curious. It sounds like you're potentially being a collaborator, or at least an aggregator of the Internet of Everything type data coming from different sources. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So in this project, we are. So with this insurance company, it's not particularly good at innovating or delivering on revolutionary things. So we've joined in a partnership with them. So some of the things we're picking up in this project are clock in, clock out times of the building, work-related travel, expenses, as we were saying, vending machine consumption in floors of the building, all of these different passive data sources that most organizations can tap on with a small amount of work. And we're just starting our first customer data. We've just started consuming the data for the first customer in this piece of work, and it's a bit experimental. It's a bit interesting. We know that our stuff can predict burnout, but we'll be really interested to see what Red Bull consumption or candy consumption or work-related travel. What signals can we get out? And to do this, we're doing surveys as well, so that we can start to correlate feelings of burnout versus these passive indicators.
Very good. Very cool.
So one of the things that's really exciting for us and really close to our heart as an organization is starting to provide fresh data around diversity and inclusion. And a lot of organizations are reaching that point where they can count their diversity. That's done and that's publishable. But what we're able to do is start to show how inclusive people's networks are and how different people and different ethnic groups, different ages, are building different networks in the organization, and is that having an impact on promotions or succession or tenure? We've just finished a big analysis with a big asset manager here in the US. We were able to show that, for example, women's networks, if they were to be promoted, they needed to have multiple senior leaders in their network. And men's networks, those senior leaders weren't important. And men's networks, it was to have a broad-based network across all the different levels of the hierarchy in the organization. So we're starting to get some really interesting measures, trying to build those into a set of gentle nudges or holding a mirror to the organization to help organizations understand in the world of work, influence, and work and collaboration, how different people's networks are built and where they may be strong or weak, and how can they use that to build more diversity of thought, diversity of outcomes. And just one more example, one of the first things we started to look at was collaboration. Excuse me, and it turned out collaboration was much harder than that we'd anticipated. We can measure how much people are collaborating, but where we've seen there's a big challenge is how do you move the dial on that? How do you start to make collaboration between specific departments a priority? How do you engage people to start working together and building tasks for them? And that's come back up again after a sort of a hiatus as a priority for some of our customers now.
So, Greg, again, I'm sorry to keep disturbing, but your product continues to bring very interesting and substantial questions. So the idea of diversity and inclusion right now is a very hot topic out here in California. I mean, it is worldwide, but let's just say where we are, we just seem to be all over it. I have seen various type of attempts to measure that diversity and inclusion in the hiring practice, in the compensation practice. This is a very, very, very different approach about the networking. Who do I interact with? Who don't I interact with? Or who does Nove avoid interacting with, even though they should be? And I think that there's a very positive upside of this, but there's also, if you will, the flip side of it that says this could point out a problem with, let's say, somebody avoiding a network connection with somebody they should have. Is that something that you think is in a sense, a possibility? In the UK and so on right now, they are trying very hard to legislate diversity and the whole aspect. Like everything else globally, I think it's going to show up on our shores here soon enough, and somebody's going to start looking at legislating diversity. Do you think you guys are going to be kind of in a very good spot to do so?
Yeah, and whether we went into this, I will frankly admit, like a bunch of enthusiastic, naive amateurs, and we said, hey, we can tell you how inclusive people's networks are. And so we've run it on a couple of customers and found some big lack of, politely say, not particularly inclusive networks, senior leaders, established long tenure employees. The easy bit is measuring it. The hard bit is convincing someone to change their behavior, especially around what we're measuring, which is work relationships, expertise, and innovation relationships. You can't fake our numbers because everything's a two-way street. So if we're saying you need to work with more returning to work mothers or people in the China office, then an organization has to create opportunities for people to start working together, projects, products, agile teams, ERGs, whatever it is. But that's what we're trying to measure, not just who do I like or who do I interact with, but who do I really work with. So as with a lot of our stuff, the leadership stuff and this stuff, we are partnering usually with people who are much smarter than us, who are delivering these programs and delivering this kind of transformation and change. And we're at our sweet spot, a bunch of HR nerds measuring behavior for organizations.
I think it's fascinating, and personally, but we'll wait till when we get around to the group here as to whether or not everyone feels that this is pretty cool stuff. I see it that way. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's all right. It's cool. I hear myself talking a lot, so I'm always happy to hear what other people are thinking. So as I said, collaboration is popping up again. It's again one of those things that it's quite easy to measure and quite hard to change, but we've definitely got the data available to do that. And let me just, if I can jump to can you people see my screen?
Yeah.
Yep. So let me just show you what it looks like in practice. So as I said, the TrustSphere, we're a team of about 48 employees spread from Singapore to the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and here in the US. And so what I'll show you is our own data. He boldly says, never do a live demo on a webinar, he says to himself.
It's one of those things where it doesn't want to quite do what you'd like it to do. There we go.
Okay,
So as you're doing that, I don't know if you can multitask on this one, but it occurred to me that as you were saying that you track cell phones and corporate emails, my question to you is, as we are moving more and more to the virtual organization, the contingent workforce is becoming much more of our workforce as a whole, are there thoughts or any restrictions about grabbing things like cell phones of contingent workforce, or in some cases, I've worked for many startups where they don't have phones. Everybody brings their own cell phone and that's their work number. So thoughts about that? Is there a privacy perspective versus just the ability to grab that?
So telephony is much more complicated than email. If a customer wants to start gathering this data like we do internally for ourselves using Office 365, it's as little as 45 minutes to set up the connector and start the data flowing. But our customers who are using this on telephony are typically well-regulated organizations, banks and insurers, and they already have a process of harvesting, corporate cell phones, Cisco Avaya systems, even telecoms logs that are archived away in archive systems. So it's not a small job to start taking, a Sprint or an AT&T set of call data records, cleansing them, and reformatting them into a consistent manner, and then loading this data in. So it's a big job, and our customers who are using our visualizations on top of their own records have already embarked on projects to do that. But I would say that 90% of our customers are everyone starts with email. Lots of people add instant messaging, and telecom stuff is sort of the holy grail.
Gotcha. Thanks.
So what I'll do in this is I'll visualize my own network, so we can see, I can put my name in, I can put an individual's email address or a corporate domain. I can look at communications over a set period of time. I can then look at internal or external or all relationships, and then I can segment it based on the type of communications and the strength of the relationship. So if I just run this for my own network, the system's going to go away and analyze. At the moment, in that period of the end of June to now, I've got 462 relationships. So we're seeing this lump here as me. You can start to understand a little bit more about Greg Newman. First email I sent was luckily my first day at work on the 5th of February. Last time I sent an email was 11:30 this morning, and in that time I've received 23,000 emails and sent 15,000. So in this period, I have 313 relationships in the report selection period. 89 of them are active, and they're split between low, medium, and strong. So we can then go back in time and go back to the start and watch my network grow and change. So what you're seeing there is initially all my relationships are blue, as in internal, as I built relationships with all of my colleagues. We're running through 2015, 2016, 17, and into 2018. So you can then start to say, based on this clump of relationships, we can filter it then to say, who are Greg's strongest relationships,
Is everybody seeing your screen? Are you guys seeing Greg's screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Thanks. For some reason, mine went away, but we'll leave that alone. Thanks.
Okay. So then you can watch us building relationships with IBM. So I think this starts with our Chief Strategy Officer and our CEO. It's our Chief Strategy Officer and our CEO there. And you can see the volumes of communications being exchanged. You can see people coming into the network, people joining different parts of the network, the network becoming more centralized. And then you see we get busier and busier through to the first half of this year, where things go a little bit nuts, to be frank. And then once we've got that, the layers of understanding we can have, there's all of the individuals that we interact with in the IBM world, but we can also look at this and just do some quick analyses. For example, who are the most central to the network? So it starts to size the human beings in the organization based on how influential they are in the network. Some healthy competition at the moment between our CEO and our North American sales leader, who is ex-IBM, is our marketing manager, our Chief Strategy Officer. So you can start to understand if Jack was leaving or Priya was leaving, look at all of these relationships that Priya has with people at IBM that no one else has. Whereas most of Manish's network are shared, except for just these two, with other people in the organization. So we have a set of visualizations we can run. We can also do, for example, what we call the transition report, which is our simplest tool, which just enables us to run a handover report for myself, based on the relationships that I've built, so that I can give a structured handover and start to tell my manager, these are the 20 or 30 people. So you can see here we have sorted by strength of relationship, all of the different people that I've got relationships with, how recently I've interacted, how strong the communications are. If we go down to try and find an external, so if we look at Shweta, one of our partners there, if I was leaving, we can see I've got a fairly strong relationship with her. We can click on that and look to see who else in our organization also has a relationship with Shweta. And this is what people buy for sales teams and contact management. So we can quickly see Greg has a strong relationship, our CEO does, and our other US people, analytics people, also has a strong relationship, and Tabby, who's the EA to Manish, also, she has a relationship, but only weak. So it's a quick demonstration of the types of insights we can pull through our front end. As I said, we have an API layer to extract this out, so customers can combine it with other sorts of data. That's probably enough from me.
Very cool. So, questions from the audience. Certainly, Greg, I think you continue to stretch my imagination, which some of you who know me, it's not going to be hard. But nonetheless, the idea is, I'm seeing a platform, again, as we talked a little bit earlier, that has a great deal of extensibility beyond what people would normally consider to be that, what's our social network? Who do I go to for help type of stuff? So, folks, let me open it up for some questions and then we'll certainly provide some feedback to Greg as well. So, anyone out there have anything to ask Greg?
Yeah, I'll ask. Hey, Greg, this is Lori Kendall. I've got several questions for you. My first question is, in work environments, it's not uncommon for people to have several different types of email post boxes in a single client. And so if I'm an employee who comes in, and let's say on my client, I'm loading my work mailbox, and I'm, say, loading my personal mailbox, do you crawl both of those, or just those that you've got stuff installed in the back end on the server?
Yeah, we're definitely server-led technology, right? So we are starting with your corporate email server or your Slack platform or something like that, and we don't currently have that option to opt in. We love the idea of that. We love what we call the increasing intimacy. If people are happy to share, LinkedIn data or Facebook data or private Gmail data, we will get to a point where people can opt in on that, but at the moment it's based at a server level. So you could have 300 servers in a large bank, for example. You could choose to put 20 of them on. You could choose to put all 300 of them on. It's pretty flexible. Also, like our leadership stuff, the company might have 100,000 employees, but we're only taking 200 of them to measure their networks for a period.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So I heard you mention the fact that you can integrate into Slack as well.
Yep.
Okay. So one of the things about banks, insurance companies, and other heavily regulated industries is that collaboration platforms are being required to be encrypted. And for example, at Cisco, WebEx Teams, formerly known as Spark, is encrypted end-to-end. So what will you all do when you've got the problem that each conversation has a private key?
Yeah, so, and this is, I'm definitely not a technologist, right? I'm the bit in between the real boffins and the customers, but we've had that conversation in Asia, for example. Lots of people use WeChat or something like that to do their corporate communications, and WeChat is entirely encrypted, so nobody can get access to that except for the Chinese government, and we're not good enough friends with them yet to start accessing that. So where encryption is in place, we don't have a magic key, but what we're doing is we're accessing this data typically at a server log level. So, and I'm not a Slack expert, but if Slack is creating a transaction log file, that's the point that we'll be accessing the data. And for stuff like diversity and inclusion, we anonymize the data on the fly because we have no real interest in knowing who the individual humans are. So we can run on-premise, we can run on the cloud, we have a lot of deployment options, but I can't tell you that we can crack encrypted servers or encrypted communication.
Yeah, and in fact, the fact that you can scrape the transaction log, if you have any part of your solution encrypted, then the transaction logs themselves also must be encrypted, or your security people are going to throw a hissy fit.
Yeah, so that'll be a challenge for us, I will admit, but you know, that's all part of the fun.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And the same also, you also get email. Some email servers have encrypted options to encrypt at the server end. So I would reckon that would also be problematic as well.
I'm guessing it will be. We haven't encountered anyone who wants us to access an encrypted email server yet, but yeah, I'm guessing even our smartest dolphins still couldn't fix that problem.
Yeah. Yep. No, it's legitimate. And I think my final question is, so that individuals don't have a perception that the solution is creepy. One of the things, I mean, this recent, privacy bust, and with the acknowledgement of Facebook selling data to China, it's raising a bit of a row, and I would imagine that there's some long-term ramifications. And of course, Apple at the developer conference went to great lengths, somewhat incorrectly, to boast about your data's private and protected. So how do you get around that? Because some folks might say, I really don't, it's one thing to know that I sent a message to Fred at, Fred.com. It's another thing to know what Fred and I talked about.
Yep.
So how do you get around that?
Privacy is super important to us, and the balance of corporate reward and individual privacy is a dance we're always trying to balance, right? So the first thing is that we are starting with corporate communication. So we're not starting with your Gmail or your Hotmail or your Facebook. So it's a tool your employer provided you with the reason that you will do work on it. And around the world, with a few exception of a few corner cases, even in Europe, your employer has a right to access this data, to use this data to make decisions. What we would love is that if our customers were more democratic and more transparent about using this data, and some of them are not, but we've created simple things like a weekly report that all employees can get that says, Here's where your network is strongest. Here's your weakest relationships. Here's your new relationships. Eventually that will have baked into it. This is how influential you are. This is how collaborative you are. And we also have a mobile application, so employees can access their network, search their network, look at their relationships, search the links within as well. So we really want this to be at an employee level and transparent to employees, but it's pretty much not a legal discussion, but a cultural discussion for organizations about how they approach that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, but here's your rub, is that with the onset of social media, I haven't seen recent studies on this, but email communication has, if anything, gotten less professional. And it's partly spurred by the fact that on social media, people can behave like complete jerks under the guise of a certain amount of anonymity. And yes, we know when we log into a corporate email site that our employer has the right to read emails. And the reality is that most of the time, most of those emails aren't actually being read. There's the threat of them being read for the purposes if I've been a bad boy or girl, but most of the time they're not. And so now to be systematically mined, I just wonder the effect that will have in terms of how people will view. I've seen, even in my largest corporate client on the West Coast, 70,000 person company, who, by the way, are largely getting away from email because they're using team collaboration types of software. But the stuff people are saying, I find myself quite surprised.
And we don't touch that content, right? Because we have, ideologically as a company, we're not willing to do semantic evaluation to try and judge content of communications and for good and bad, positive and negative, all that kind of stuff. We've played with it. We've worked with some partners who can do it. But for us, what we're really interested in is who do you have relationships with, not how did that relationship come about and what is that relationship for, because we know email is primarily about innovation, expertise and work. But yeah, we don't have any plans to start doing any sort of semantic evaluation on people's email.
Mm-hmm. Although it is such a small step in your agent-based networks and your bridging and bonding illustrations to go there. I mean, that's a really small step. That's a half step, no?
Well, technologically, it's quite a massive step, right? Because you imagine our biggest customer, 200,000 people, 12 million email messages an hour. That's a lot of content. That's really big data at that point.
I understand. I do it today. So I'm just saying I'm very comfortable with my answer. It from a technology perspective, yeah, it is data, but and yeah, you need a lot of processing power, but it's philosophically a pretty small step.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed.
Okay. Well, those are my questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Others have questions for Greg? None. I have one very quick one, Greg. I say quick. So, like most cloud vendors, you're sitting on shall we say, a vast amount of data. Any thoughts about any analytics that you could get out that is cross-company, in other words, or cross-customer, where there would be, so if I'm starting out a company, can you help me provide a template of what a good network looks like? I think things like that. I'm just kind of extending all that data that you've got. Is there a value to that to publish this anonymously, but predictive type of stuff or metrics?
I think there's an enormous opportunity, and I can't pretend that we're that massive at the moment that we could start to reliably benchmark a CIO's corporate communications or a CEO's network across different industry verticals or different geographies. But what we've done is we've partnered with an organization who already produce HR benchmarks, and they have, a good ability to gather benchmark data and sell benchmark data. So what we're doing is we're going to start supplying data with customer consent to them for them to start producing benchmarks. We really just want to be a a software as a service vendor, and that's where we're most comfortable and that's where we're most skilled. So I can see a real value in it. We have customers who are internally benchmarking roles and teams and departments, but we haven't jumped to doing that at a cross-corporate level, and I don't think it's necessarily our skill set.
Gotcha. Good answer. All righty. Anything else, folks? If not, certainly some feedback would be very appropriate to give to Greg. You know, just in your shop, your thoughts, even just your career in general. Where do you see this being used? Do you think it has value, etc.? And of course, I always make the invitation. If you would like to contact Greg, please let me know, and I'll make sure that we get connected. But any thoughts, any parting words for Greg in terms of usefulness and what it's shown? Sometimes the crowd is pretty quiet. Then I'll give you my 2.5 cents again. I tend to be very enamored with some of the new technology and some of the new approaches, but like most of the vendors we've been seeing recently, I think TrustSphere does represent a platform that has some probably even unthought of uses as we go forward with this. And it'll be an interesting situation to see as people are adopting your product, what they're getting out of that. You know, the analytics related to like a company's launching a brand new program of sorts and looking at how that has morphed in terms of relationships and changes process. You know, from a business process management side, I guess is what I'm saying. Can I look at it and model some perspectives of an HR program that would change the way we're doing our business? I think everybody's trying to be very, very innovative about that. But I think you've got a tool that's going to have some pretty good uses in those arenas. Anything else, folks? Please, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, you go.
Oh, Greg, yeah. I know quite a bit about the product, but I think extending on what Nov just said, I think one of the great use cases is mergers and acquisitions. And I think you guys softening the effect of those and potentially making them more successful, the way that teams get integrated. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that process, because that seems like certainly a very active area at the moment.
That's a perfect question at the perfect time. Just yesterday, I was in San Francisco for a conference on HR's role in mergers and acquisitions, and I've spoken, because we've not done anything in this space yet. We have a lot of ideas, but yeah, I engaged with a couple of prospects yesterday. One, I was telling Nov, is a highly acquisitive tech company in San Francisco, and they acquire about 40 companies a year. And what they're interested in doing is to measure the CEO's network post day one, to start to see what a successful CEO does after they've been acquired. How did that grow into the organization, and how did their network merge with the larger organization? So yeah, we think this is a really exciting area, and I think this will be a real watch this space for us to do something pretty quickly in this area.
This is Mike again. I'll be honest with you, I'm having trouble trying to see how I could make this work at my organization. I work for Chevron, and we have a very mature, disciplined approach to identifying high potential employees, and they're nurtured and taken care of, and given opportunities, and they continually deliver. I can see this as validating our list of Hypose based on data we don't look at, like social networking and stuff like that. I'm not sure how I would use this, to be honest with you. I mean, like I said, we already have a very mature discipline in place. I can see this having great value for companies who maybe don't have that kind of discipline in place, where they want to identify who their stars are. I got to imagine that IBM, before you engaged with them, had a very disciplined approach as well to identifying who their stars are. What has IBM, what have they been able to do with this product to extend that understanding of who their stars are? Or am I missing something? Obviously, there's more to it than just identifying who your stars are, but so I don't know. Maybe that's a question that requires a lot more discussion, and I don't know that we have the time, but you see where I'm going with that?
Yep. So what we do with IBM is we're not doing things like leadership development or Hypose with IBM. IBM are using our technology to support their own collaboration platforms, and their verse integrations and things like that, so that they can start to get telemetry on how those systems are being adopted, who are the influencers who are driving them. You know, we embed our stuff into the Microsoft Verse email platform, so you can start to see hidden relationships and hidden influences. When you receive an email from a prospect, it starts to show you what existing relationships already exist between your organization and that prospect. So we're not working with them on leadership development yet, much like you guys at Chevron. I'm sure they have very well structured and set up processes. But what we also know is that a lot of the traditional HR data that's gathered doesn't change that often. So if we start to look at assessments or skills or qualifications, you know, how often do they change? You know, how up to date are they? Whereas what we're able to see is a complementary piece of data, not a replacement piece of data, but that's able to reliably say this is someone who's quickly becoming central to a network, quickly becoming influential with a group in the organization, or, you know, all of that sort of thing, because we're continuously listening and it's pretty much in real time.
Okay, thank you.
Superb. Well, we're at the hour. Greg, I want to say thank you very, very much. Again, we continue to be very entertained with all the vendors. I think this has got some really interesting uses that we haven't thought through quite yet. I would love to see you do a Disrupt HR somewhere in the near future, just telling people what a social network could mean to them. Probably you will disrupt HR all over the place. Anyway, thank you all very much in the audience. Our Technology Review Council, again, as always, I appreciate your support and your interest, and we're certainly going to have more to come. So again, thanks very much. And if you missed any part of this and you need the recording, just let me know. If you want to contact Greg, please let me know that as well, although you've got his email there, but I'm certainly happy to get him in touch with you. All right, well, stay well, everyone, and see you soon. We won't have one next week. I'm in travel and transit, but we will have a Technology Review Council on the 21st. So we'll see you then. Take care now. Thanks.